let's talk
It's
about one of the programs I just mentioned because Georgia Tech's on our list as well, and I
yeah.
think they would have a lot to say about the pecking order between them and Miami right now.
That's right. Is Georgia Tech trying to be in a position where they'd be offended to say, "Oh, what do you mean we're automatically losing to Miami?" Brent Key is made the full-time head coach after Jeff Collins was fired mid-year. Georgia Tech, we talked about it on a previous podcast. Georgia Tech wanted Willie Fritz from Tulane, but they wouldn't let him coach in the Cotton Bowl and then bring him in. So they hired Brent Key from within, and very popular hire within the locker room, which I think is step one to rebuilding a team. Right? You look at like Auburn, for instance, and the Hugh Freeze hire. That may very well work out. Another fan base that was divided by that head coaching hire and kind of appalled when that news got confirmed. The players wanted Cadillac Williams, and I know the players can't necessarily um, see what would be best for the team, for the program 5 years down the line, because they're thinking such in the here and now. But I do think it's a good first step for Georgia Tech. Key, to his credit, he won, I think, 4 games last year. Georgia Tech had one
He did,
win.
yeah, 4-4.
Yeah, when Collins got fired. So, I mean, definitely progress there. I think that I think the first step that Key had to make, and one that you would say about any team that's rebuilding in the way that Georgia Tech is, you have to go out and you have to win some of that talent in the transfer portal. They lost for the second year in a row a host of really talented guys that went elsewhere. They lost their entire quarterback room. Jeff Sims is up to Nebraska, who I think is our next team on the list. We'll talk about him in just a few minutes. But they did do a good job selling the vision, selling the program under year one, and I think they've got some decent finds in the transfer portal.
Yeah, and Georgia Tech's just in such an interesting situation because if I was Georgia Tech, I would have let Willie Fritz, if he was my guy, I would have let him do whatever he needed to do. I
Sure.
think that was personally, I think that was a huge misstep because you're a program that's searching for identity. And the identity that you had under Jeff Collins was, we're going to be pro Atlanta. We're going to start in Atlanta. We're going to get all these guys from Georgia. We're going to build the foundation of our program off of this. And look, Jeff Collins, that job that he had was not easy. Switching the team from a triple option offense under Paul Johnson to
Yeah.
a more modernized offense. That is like, you look at any high school in any state that tries to go from the wing tee to the air raid, they're probably going to go 1-9 at best in most of those first years of the transition. So the problem was you just never saw progress. And what I'm concerned about with Georgia Tech, Brent Key seems like a great guy. He went 4-4 in his audition year this year, but man, it really seemed like they needed some new ideas in that locker room. And it really seemed like they needed some new perspective. So I don't know. Like they tried the triple option, they tried being different, and that was successful for them. They wanted to get away from that. They tried to go with a pro Georgia guy. Let's build it from Georgia. Let's build it from Atlanta. And I'm concerned that they're not going to see that much of a change in mindset
Hmm.
with the Brent Keys staff. So that's my biggest concern from them. I really wanted to see them go for a splash higher, go for a guy, I don't know, like a Deion Sanders. If he's going to go to Colorado, he certainly, I think, would have gone to Georgia Tech maybe. And I don't know what Deion was thinking. And I'm sure there's a lot. Maybe they did have those conversations and it fell through. But man, I am just really bummed about the Brent Key hire personally. I know he beat 3 teams that were objectively way better than his squad. He beat Pitt, he beat Duke, and he beat North Carolina last year. And that's probably the 3 best wins that Georgia Tech has had in a really long time.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
when's the last time a promotion from within, like you fire your head coach and then you promote the interim, other than Dabo Sweeney, has that ever worked out? Like I can't remember a time
Yeah.
I can't personally remember a time that that's like really been, a decision that a program looks back on saying that's what got us to where we are and that's what put us in a good place.
Yeah. I agree. It's I know fan bases typically. I say typically. A lot of fan bases, when they do fire their head coach midseason, they root for, if there's any sort of progress, they root for that interim head coach, because that's seen as the easiest lifeline, right? Someone came in, a Cadillac Williams, injected some life, injected some culture back into the locker room. Auburn objectively played hard for him, harder for him than they did under the previous administration. I mean, it was just you could see it on the field. And so I understand why so many fan bases will root for that. But at the end of the day, Cadillac doesn't have D1 coaching experience. He's not a head coach at that level quite yet, certainly not at the Auburn level. And so I can see why the Brent Keith hire would be a little flat, right? And maybe a little uninspiring. I guess we'll see. The thing for me that Georgia Tech absolutely has to do, they have to get back to those Atlanta roots. Like Jeff Collins tried, but he didn't succeed.
Yeah,
Going back to, I think was it 2019 when he took over? When he took over, there was one 4-star or better, so a 4-star, that Georgia Tech won over Georgia, and that was Jahmyr Gibbs. If both teams offered them while Jeff Collins was the head coach, they won once, and it
that's
was for
insane.
Jahmyr Gibbs.
Like that, like you'd think you'd stumble into at
Right.
least 5 or 6 in a
Yeah.
4-year period. That's insane.
No, it's truly a staggering stat. So for me, outside of finding quarterback one, which I think is a common theme for most of these teams, right? If you stink, typically it's because your quarterback either wasn't good, you had injuries, turnover, turmoil, whatever. They have to find quarterback one, but on a larger scale, for me, they've got to get some juice back into the Rambling Wreck. You've got to make it a point of pride to stay in downtown Atlanta, to play for the Institute, and to rep your zip code, right? I mean, that's what they've tried to do, and they did so spectacularly awful. I mean, it was the antithesis of what they actually needed to do. Can Key get that going? I don't know. We'll have to see. But that's if Georgia Tech is ever going to be successful, it's going to start at a very hyper local level. They're not going to be able to go out and grab the Californian guys, the East Coast guys outside of Florida, the high even Florida recruits come into Texas without building some sort of a brand first. And to me, that starts at home in the city of Atlanta.
Totally agree. And what you're going to have to do if you're Georgia Tech is realize, at least at the beginning, where you are in the pecking order for most of those 4 and 5 star recruits. You are going to have to outwork and out scout all the other programs that are on your level. Like the South Carolinas and the North Carolina states and all these other programs on the East Coast that are better than you right now because they're getting better talent and they're finding those guys that fit the system that they want to run. Like you said, they won one head-to-head matchup between on a 4 or 5 star blue chip recruit with Georgia in the 4 years that Jeff Collins was there. Stop trying to fight those battles with Georgia. Like, don't if you're not going to win, and it doesn't look like the Georgia recruiting machine is going to slow down anytime soon. Like, don't go up against in a losing situation. I don't know if they were just putting all their eggs. They felt confident that they could win more of those, and that just trickled down. Didn't put them in a position with guys they could have gotten, but there's a plethora of talented guys that are underrated in a state like Georgia. You're going to have to fight off a lot of programs because, like we said earlier, Florida and Miami are not getting guys in state. Florida State right now aren't
Right.
getting guys in state. So they're going to come after those Georgia kids. Clemson's going to come after those Georgia kids. Um, South Carolina, North Carolina, all of them are going to come down and after those Georgia kids, Alabama. But there's so much talent in that state and so much talent right below you in the state of Florida that just gets overlooked every single year
Mhm.
and ends up at places like UCF, ends up at places like Florida Atlantic. Go after those guys. Go after those like fast athletic 3 stars that can really change your program. You get enough of those guys, you hit on those guys. And I know the hit rate isn't as strong as a 4 or 5 star recruit, but if you hit on enough of those guys, all of a sudden you've got a really talented team that buys into your system and fits what you're trying to do. So if I'm Brent Key, that's what I'm trying to do. I
Mhm.
just have a lot of concerns. Looking at his resume, obviously last year was his first chance at a head coaching job. He went 4-4, 4-3 in conference play, which is way better than they have done. But you look at his resume outside of that, he's coached at UCF. He was the OC there. And I believe he was the OC when they went 0-12 or whatever that one year
Mhm.
before Scott Frost went and kind of resurrected that program. And he was the O line coach at Alabama before becoming the associate head coach and O-line coach at Georgia Tech. I don't know that that's the resume I want to build a program around, if I'm just being
Right.
honest. Like, I would have liked to see more success as a head coach from the guy that Georgia Tech hired.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I will say the one positive as we wrap up Georgia Tech, he did get some decent chips out of the transfer portal. They lost a lot, but they also got a number of guys in from Georgia, from Clemson, Minnesota, Louisville, Texas A&M, Christian Leary, four-star wide receiver coming over from Alabama. They've got pieces, and we've seen the transfer portal can inject life into a program that had previously been without a rudder, whether you're a blue blood like USC or you're, a lower ranked team like TCU. I mean, we talked about it. They got 6 starters on the defensive side of the ball out of the transfer portal last season, and look where
Yeah.
it took them, right? I mean, now I'm not saying see Georgia Tech in Charlotte for the ACC championship game. Don't hear that, but I do think that there's a measure of hope that you can get out of the transfer portal if everything clicks.
Gracious him. How about